Okay, thanks very much, Matt. So, as Matt said, my name is John Payne. I work for InterSystems. I'm going to open up this session talking a little bit about some of the background to the technology we're using. Phil, who works for the NHS and is the senior responsible owner for the project that resulted in this service being constructed, is then going to talk about the use case, and then I'm going to follow that up with some more of the detail about how it's actually been built. So just to sort of set the scene really a little bit, in terms of the agenda, once we've gone through sort of the use case, we're going to talk about the design overview, look at some of the message flows that move around the various components, as it is comparatively complex when we include all the various particular aspects of security in the solution, and then we'll end up with hopefully with a few minutes for questions. I'm aware that we're sort of the last session of the day, so hopefully we'll try not to drag on too much in between you and going for a cup of tea or whatever. Okay, so let's talk a little bit first of all. Well, first of all, can I just ask a question? How many people in the room are actually using FHIR in some way, shape, or form? 2, 3, 4. So maybe about 20%. Yeah, okay, Phil, yes. I'd hope that you are, because we're doing it with you. So FHIR is the latest standard from HL7. So we've had HL7 version 2, HL7 version 3, CDA, and now we have FHIR. And if we look on the right in the diagram, we can see over time the various sort of levels of adoption of the different protocols. So version 2 has been widely used across for integrating clinical systems for many years. CDA, which is clinical document architecture, moving a format for moving documents around, has started out shortly after version 3 because it used certain aspects of version 3 messaging to wrap documents in and to provide a machine-readable format for documents. That has a relatively wide use. In the US, it's things like CCD documents. In the UK, transfers of care are often moved around as CDA documents. HL7 version 3 itself, as a standard, has not really been a success, predominantly because it's highly complex. The information model behind it takes like 2 weeks of training just to sort of really get into it. And then HL7 FHIR really started as a standard because people accepted that version 3 was too complex. And so the idea behind FHIR is it's been much more accessible. And indeed, if we look at it now, it's really used in 3 main ways. So the FHIR standard is used to define messages, define message sets for moving information around from one place to another. And indeed, what we're doing in the UK, we're seeing that those message sets are being extended with UK-specific profiles for specific purposes. The FHIR standard itself also provides for a REST-based API to interchange data programmatically as opposed to message flow. So one system requesting data via an API and receiving it. And the FHIR standard being based on REST is a simple way that fits into a wide variety of technologies today for doing that. And then thirdly, it also allows for transporting documents, so fitting in with CDA. So generally, FHIR is based around modern transport standards, and it supports the rapid adoption of that. The event management service that we've created in the UK under Phil's guidance is really all about using FHIR messaging at scale, rolling it out across a wide community and ramping up the volumes to provide real clinical care. And it's been implemented using a combination of features from HealthShare plus the FHIR standards, gives a reduced implementation time. So we've put the basic service up quite rapidly. Okay, a little bit about terminologies, just in case people aren't familiar with these. So publish and subscribe, this is a mechanism that's used within the FHIR service. Source systems generate FHIR events. They're published to the service, and then the service looks at data in those events to see which subscribers have an interest in those events. So the subscribers register an interest, perhaps via some demographic details, perhaps by the different types of event, and then they then receive notifications of events according to those subscriptions. The information flow across the service is audited, it's reliable, it's robust. The implementation was originally based around the FHIR DSTU2 standard, now moved on to DSTU3, which is the current version. Transport of data, FHIR allows the content to be structured either as XML or as JSON, XML being a structured self-describing document which requires a schema, JSON being schema-less, so it's simpler again, and authentication and authorization around the connection between the systems and their ability to receive data is handled using OAuth. Okay, so on that note, what I'll do now is I'll hand over to Phil, who'll talk you through the clinical use case for this.
Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. So this is me, Philip Graham, Digital Programme Lead, HealthShare Lancashire and South Cumbria. So it's about... That's gone. Come back. It's about 10 o'clock my real time, so if I fall asleep, I do apologise. Read the slides amongst yourselves. And the last time I did this presentation for InterSystems, I forgot my trousers. So I am better attired this time than last time. I won't go into detail on that one. I make no apologies for being from the NHS, so there might be a few acronyms, so stop me if you don't understand, and I will try and explain. NHS, National Health Service, that's the first one. But you all know children? Yes, good, right, good start. So we've got those in the UK as well as America, etc. So that's a good start. Right. So the use case that we started with, we started with a strategy in NHS England, to know where every child is and how healthy they are. Now, that's not particularly easy, to be perfectly honest. And the strategy came from quite a few reports on children that were harmed and went missing in the country as they travelled around. So what we also want to make sure is that people then have appropriate access to information for all of those involved in the care of the child. And again, that is where the distribution of this information comes in, and we use the FHIR standards. Going backwards, let's go forwards. So I won't go into detail, but there are very many drivers for this. We want to be paperless by 2020. That's not 8:20 this evening, that's in a couple of years' time. We've got the Healthy Children Strategy, have a read of it. It is applicable, like I said, you all have children, so it's very applicable. We've got the 5-year forward view. We always love a good plan in the NHS, as everybody does. We've got the state of our child health. Our children are getting more obese over time, etc., etc., so we want to monitor that. And we've got the Department of Health Healthy Child Programme. That is where we have immunisations, vaccinations, development checks, again, the things that we need to do to children to make sure they get a good start in life. So, again, you can read these slides when they go around with the presentation. I just want to pick a few things out. So, what we're looking to do is get an online record of the child's health and development. So, we're looking at a digital red book. We call this program the Red Book. I don't know what you call it in your areas, but we want to give people an app that's got this information on. So again, when did you last have the last immunisation? A lot of people, when did you last have your last tetanus jab? Can you go online and look at that? Some can, some can't. So we want to make sure we've got the online record development. We can share that information as well between all the professionals involved in that care, school nursing, health visiting, general practice, ambulatory care, I think some people call that, and all the physicians that are involved in that, school nursing, etc., etc. We want to record information about a child and publish that automatically to those in that network of care, including the parent. And those of you that were in the healthcare conference heard me talk about putting the patient at the centre of this, not the physician or the payer, but actually the person that does manage their own healthcare or that of their child. And we want up-to-date health events. We don't want them 6 months late or anything like that. It's no good. So we're having measles outbreaks in the UK. It's no good saying, oh, we had measles 6 months ago. We want to know kind of now so we can manage that health and the Healthy Children programme. 3 areas that we're looking at, the 3 Ps, personal health, professional health and public health. They are all interchangeable. So the big data for public health feeds the little data for personal health, and professionals can manage that health as well. This is not specifically focusing on one of these areas. Moving forward. So this hasn't come across very well, John, but... Whoops. So we've got the child here, and the information journey starts. So we've got screening, so we have hearing screening, eye screening, newborn screening, blood spot screening. You've probably got these public health initiatives to some extent in various countries. They're very standard. The information goes to school, nursing, health visiting, general practice. Also, we do a lot of administration to make sure that we've got the population health management sorted. And one of the big things for me is again, how we manage that healthy child pathway. We've got to surface that information to the parent. But what we're also doing is not just surfacing it, here's what's happening. What we want to do is give people control. That's obviously blood pressure. But why can't, we're all data input clerks for our insurance companies. So why aren't we inputting development checks on our children so that the people involved in that care can see what's happening? Yes, you could lie about it, but if we can manage the 80%, we can spot the liars and we can ask, why are you lying? Generally, they're the people that harm their own children. Again, you might have heard of Victoria Columbia and Baby P in England. If you haven't, you've probably got them in your own countries anyway. So again, we've got to make sure this is very secure. So how do we make sure we've got security? And it's not just within Lancashire, where I'm from. This is a national thing. So we're looking at a citizen identity program as well, where, you know, I'm not just Philip in Lancashire, I'm Philip. So that we're linking it to a citizen identity program, very similar to a lot of the ways that we do online now, where you have a photo or a video, etc., etc. It's confusing with all these things in my hand. So that's just a schematic then of what I've just shown you in a nice diagram there. I can take about an hour on this presentation, so it's got a lot of things in it, so stop me and buy one later on if you want. But in this one, what we're showing is in the strategy itself, there are 33 events. These range from single events that happen once to events that happen multiple times. So birth happens once, hopefully. Height and weight can be checked and taken in various areas. And again, you could take your own height and weight. So what we've done with InterSystems is we've created, don't worry, this will get bigger in a minute, we've created the FHIR engine. There you go, that's great, isn't it? And this is just what, again, if you stop John and ask him about this, this is what's at the centre of this. This is the InterSystems product. So I'm hoping, yes, well, look, FHIR. So, and the connectors between all of the information hubs, endpoints, whatever you want to call them, is based on the FHIR standards. As John says, DSTU2, moving to STU3 as we move forward with the programme. I'll tell you about some of the pitfalls. And that is just showing an online version of the electronic red book. So that's the information that's been surfaced to mum, dad, whoever. So that there, oh look, it comes up bigger. And the reason I just wanted to put this up, well, we're looking at how we can get internet first as well. So for those of you that, well, I can't even read that. But that is showing that this is cloud-based. So these services are cloud-based. So it's not just on a server sat in Blackpool or whatever. You know, we're looking at internet first, how we can do that. And that is the FHIR message. And this is just showing all of the audit trail that's going on about where this message went and ended up. So we've got it in the right place at the right time. That is the red book blown up. So what happens with this? You get notifications. You'll see there 6, 1, 2. So as your child moves through this pathway, a bit like we all chase the little red 1 on our phone and stuff like that. If you've got an Apple, I don't know what it is on Android, but I'm sure it's similar. So you get a notification that there's immunisation taking place, and you know that it's happened. So we can't vaccinate children twice for the same thing, and likewise, they will get a vaccination, and we're starting to manage that through passing this information between all of the people that are inputting and that need to receive it on the publication subscription model. But again, based on the citizen identity, so we know that in this case is Lisa, and that is their NHS number. I know not every country has a national identifier. I know America has to use all sorts of things like date of birth, etc. So if you talk to your government, maybe you should start to look at whether you can change your law to have something like that. I won't get into that. I got into trouble for mentioning payers yesterday, but anyway, never mind. So that's where the information, and again, that's just on Azure, for those that you can read that again. So these applications are on the web, so people can log on and use them. And we want to create a vibrant market where people aren't locked in to one application. don't know if you all have that thing where I've got an app for that. No, we want to make sure we've got an architecture that works properly and that we can have a vibrant market for all these products. Nearly there. So the considerations, as you go through this, Siri's trying to call me. I'll do that in a minute. So some of the considerations as we've gone through this, you have to have that consistent data model at all of the endpoints. So I liken this to the bank. I can go and spend $10 at the shop up there. I can use a MasterCard or a Visa card, and it gets translated into pounds, and it flows through the system. It's taken a long time to get those endpoints consistent. So I don't know, you can understand within healthcare how difficult that will be, but FHIR and the construct helps us to do that. So height and weight, for argument's sake, kilograms. If you make a mistake with that, planes can fall out of the sky, can't they, if you get the weight of your fuel wrong? So anyway. Curation, I won't go into too much detail on that. We've got to make sure that these are clinically safe as well. You know, a lot of us use interface engines and things like that, and we think we've done a good job. But you've really got to nail that down now to make sure that everybody understands. And there are things about blood pressure, whether it's been taken, sat down, stood up, you know, so you've got to make sure that people understand what that means. Reusable profiles. Children have a height and weight, so do adults. So why not use those profiles multiple times? Immunisations as well. So we've got to make sure that we do that. Testing and versioning. As we mentioned, you know, STU 2 to 3. These are the T. We need to get rid of that T in these, so that we know that, you know, when I purchase a red book, that it's been tested and it works in this ecosystem, and that the version is right. So if we move from, I don't know, everyone changes currency, don't they? So when we move from the old £10 to the new £10, all of the vending machines have to accept it. So that ecosystem, so we've got to make sure that we get all that right. Validation, we call it in the UK a kite mark. So again, how do I make sure that I'm buying applications that are fitting into this ecosystem? And we are doing that nationally as part of standards notifications. And ingestion, this is what causes us quite a difficulty. It's all right, me sending you a message, great. What do you do in your endpoint system? So some systems are quite easy, you know, just to accept a weight and put it on a graph is probably quite easy. To accept some clinical data into a primary care system isn't that easy if you've got workflow that's based around an immunisation, for argument's sake, or a diagnosis, if we use this for other cases. So, and again, you've got to look at this end to end, not just within your facility or whatever. It's how's the information flow from mum to primary care, or from a health visitor through to the child health department. And, well, there we go. I always say that, but the technology is the easy bit. Change. No one likes to change. Change is bad. Or you'll change, but on my terms. That's the best way to change? Yeah, great. But it is, the change is the hard bit in this. And I think we sometimes get caught up in all the technology. Am I there? Right, yeah, so again, just to reiterate, we want to know where every child is. This is the use case that John wanted me to talk about. I hope I've given you a picture of this. Like I said, it's quite quick for what I normally take. And we want to make sure we've got appropriate access to information for all those involved in the care of the child. One thing I did just want to add on, how long am I doing for time? Slightly over, but anyway, never mind. Children, you take the word child out of this, you've got a digital health strategy. So whilst I could manage my child's care through this, why can't I manage my parents' care through this? If they are incapable of managing their own care, why can't I manage my own care through this? So if I'm diagnosed with diabetes or something, why can't I start to do all these? There's DIASEN, there's all sorts of standards for the input of data, the Internet of Things. You know, I don't want to spoil life, but, you know, I think we could start to use it for some interesting stuff. Is this yours, John? Yes.
It is indeed.
I'm going into yours. So I think just one final thing. I always mention bits like this. Like I said, the technology is the easy bit. But once we create this ecosystem, what's in the centre doesn't matter. So the lady this morning had video, Blockbuster, DVD, streaming. Content is the key thing there. We all still watch films. So what we're trying to say is if we can get hold of the data, what sits in the middle isn't real. So if we've got these APIs, we've got these data models, we've got these standards, why not stick a blockchain in the middle? But you can argue with me about that later, whether we need it or not. And at the moment, we don't, but we're looking at whether there's a possibility, when we've got all these push-pull models, of another way to look at some of this stuff. But that's well into the future at this moment in time. So I hope that was okay. We'll take questions at the end. Was that all right, John?
Absolutely.
Does it tee you up for the next bit?
Thanks for that, Phil. Yeah, I'm mic'd up. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit more about the easy bit, as Phil puts it. So talk a little bit more about how we built this, how we constructed it, what the flows are, and then hopefully we'll have 5 minutes at the end. So we've built the event management service using components or elements of InterSystems HealthShare. So as I mentioned earlier, security is based around OAuth 2, interoperability using FHIR, publish and subscribe based around FHIR subscription messages. So the FHIR standard includes subscription messages, a mechanism for notification that there's something there for a subscription that the subscriber can then go and retrieve it. We're auditing the information flow. We're using STU3 now as the base standard for the message content. And most of the payloads that are moving around are actually JSON. So we're moving away from XML. So let's look at this as a picture. So at the top left, what we have is the various publishers of messages. So the sources of information into this ecosystem. So that could be a national event management system if something is happening outside the scope of Lancashire. It could be the child health system. It could be the GP. It could be primary care, health visitor. Someone's gone along to visit the child, perhaps. Or it could be a national screening system, so blood screening, that sort of thing. And what happens is those events will get notified into the event management system, and they'll come into a router process. That router process sends the message into a FHIR repository, so the FHIR message, the FHIR bundle is persisted. At that time, we process that message and look at whether this satisfies the criteria associated with any subscriptions. If there are subscriptions that are subscribing to that particular message, what we'll then do is we'll then send a notification out to a subscribing system. Again, that could be the national event system. It could be similar sets of subscribers to the people who are receiving the message, but initiating the message, but also things like the personal child health record, the red book that Phil was talking about. Thank you. Yes, indeed. This is where the mums see what's going on for the child. So that's probably, yes, the most important consumer. So the event notification goes out, and then these systems can then come back and actually pull the event from HealthShare and consume it as they wish. So conceptually it's a relatively simple model. Okay, what I'll do now is I'll just graphically show you the information flow, and then we'll talk through that in a little bit more detail. So on the left we have something called EMIS Web. This is a child health system, but it's also the GP system. In the center, we have the event management service, and then on the right, we have the screening system and the e-red book, which is the child personal health record. We also have a national system. In this context, it's the patient demographic service, which is a national authoritative source of demographic information for everybody in England. And we also have an external OAuth 2 server, which is providing an authoritative authentication and authorization source. So a FHIR message, EMIS Web will want to publish a message. It'll get authority to do that. It'll send the event to the EMS, which is stored. The EMS will then check the demographics against the national system, then evaluate those demographics and decide that there is an interest in that message back in the child health system or in the Red Book system. Similarly, we might have a screening event, a blood spot screening is being checked. The notification goes to the EMS. The EMS then retrieves that message, stores that, does the demographics check, catching up here, and then that event gets flowed out again either through to the child health system or might get flowed out to the personal health record. So visually, that's the flow of messages around the system in a fairly simple graphical form. And what I'll do now is I'll just walk through that a little bit more slowly. Hopefully, it makes a bit more sense. So the publisher of the message to send the message bundle to the endpoint, the API point that's surfaced by the EMS. First of all, it'll request an access token, and then once it's got that access token to say that it's allowed to send that message, we'll then publish the FHIR bundle to the EMS. So the EMS, when it receives that FHIR bundle, the first thing it'll do is it'll validate it. So the idea here is to ensure that all the content, all the messages that come into the EMS are structurally and contextually correct before they're persisted and processed. If they're not, we send a bad message response back. So once we've validated that, done that validation, we then persist the bundle within the FHIR repository, and then we return the outcome to the publisher. Once we've got a valid message, and we know that valid message is here, we've got it safe stored, what we then want to do is to look at the subscriptions that might be fired or might have an interest in that message. So we'll pull out some key event data, whether that's the event code, NHS number, date of birth, gender. We look at where the child is that this event refers to. And then we'll build a list of matching criteria for all the various subscriptions that are out there. Once we have those criteria, once we've figured out which subscribers have an interest in that message, then we'll create a notification for each of those subscribers, and then we'll send those subscriptions out to each endpoint. And in order to do so, the first thing that we'll do is obviously we'll go out and get an OAuth2 token to access that endpoint. Once we've got the valid token, we can then send a message bundle to the subscriber's endpoint, and then we'll handle the response back from that endpoint, assuming they say yes, they're happy with that. If they're not, then that's otherwise the case. Now, some endpoints that we've talked to have been able to follow the FHIR standard more completely than others. So those which do follow the model where in FHIR, if someone's subscribing to a message, you tell that subscriber that there's a message that they're interested in. They then have to separately come in to you to retrieve it. Okay? So that way, the identity of the people that are coming in to retrieve the message is more certain than if you're just sending that to an endpoint, which is a slightly less secure process. So when a subscriber's received that notification that there's a message of interest to them, again, they'll get an OAuth token, they'll send the HTTP request to the event management service, that gets validated, and then we'll send the FHIR bundle back to that subscriber on behalf of the publisher. So we're serving as an intermediary with a safe, persistent store that's ensuring that we have end-to-end authentication and authorization across this disconnected network of systems. Look at the message flow in a slightly different format. Publisher starts off, talks to the OAuth2 server, the access token comes back, sends the access token, the event message to the EMS. The EMS says yes or no, assuming it says yes. Then the EMS will get an access token and then use that access token to go and talk to the subscriber. Okay, hopefully that's all reasonably clear now. terms of how the process flows talking about. Okay, what I wanted to do to sort of finish up what I'm talking about now, before we have some time for questions, is really to talk a little bit about the process in which we're developing the FHIR messages that are being used here and the way in which they're being deployed. So the NHS has got a policy now, which it's had for a little while, of saying that all new integration work, all new APIs, all new interfaces should follow the FHIR standards. And the NHS is then taking those FHIR standards, STU3 now, and specialising those to add UK-specific content as extensions. So that if as far as the Healthy Child programme is concerned, there was an initial stage of development of the standards which produced what's called experimental profiles. They then moved into an alpha phase, and then they moved into a beta phase. So the beta phase profiles are what we're working with at the moment. They're not expected to change. They are likely to progress to live production, and in fact we're starting to do the work to move the pilot, which has been working with beta versions of the profile, into live production now. And as the process goes through, then the message structures, the message candidates will move through to a live API status. And the NHS is working through this process with a number of different profiles covering different functional areas of care. So if we want to look at the actual content of one of these FHIR bundles a little more, at the top of the message is a message header, and in this case, if we're looking at an immunisation event, so a child's been vaccinated, then the message header tells you what the type of event is, tells you it's an immunisation, tells you where the information came from, what system originated it, who the publisher was, when the event was published, when the event occurred. And this information is certainly in terms of generally in STUC and absolutely in terms of all the profiles that the NHS is adopting, it's common across every single profile that the NHS is building. So in terms of an event management service, then this information is applicable across every message that we see flowing through it. And indeed, so there's more that's also common. Things like the publisher of the event, which may not be the same organisation as that which originates it, the actual part of the NHS which originated it, the location, the patient, in this case the child that it refers to, so information about that child, name, NHS number, date of birth. Remember, these demographics are validated against the National Demographic Service as the event flows through. Then if we look at the content a little more, well, we've described the organisation and we've described the child. We then start to look at which health practitioner actually engaged in the activity that generated this event. So in this case, it might be a nurse that gave the vaccination, and then we have the detail about the immunisation itself. So this is an example of an immunisation profile, and it's really this information here that generally varies across the different event types. So as Phil alluded to, there might be one birth notification. There'll be lots and lots of different measurements of height and weight as the child goes through early years. There might be a number of other different types of intervention, an event that occurs during the child's span, which together forms this Red Book record of the child's life. Okay, so this is how the messages are built up. This is how they're structured. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, subscriptions. Originally, when we were talking to the NHS about describing how the service was going to work, we had a lot of conversations about an extensible list of subscriptions that might be useful, that could potentially encompass any data item within the FHIR bundle. However, during conversations with Phil, during conversations with the architects in NHS Digital, it became apparent that the ability of various systems to actually usefully use that capability would be extremely limited. So at that point, the decision was made to collapse that complete set of possibilities for subscriptions down to the ones which were felt to be the most important and which would actually deliver some real value. So in this case, it's a list of event codes, so it could be all, could be a subset, could be one. The NHS number, and so the identifier for the child, and then the organisation code. So it's the organisation which generating the event, which we can then map to not only where the event took place, but given the NHS number, we can also map that to a particular geographic location. So we can then, for example, notify health visitors and the like of events that occur to children in their area. So we've got a reasonably complex set of circumstances catered for within that relatively simple list. The actual subscription itself looks like this. I haven't put up any of the code examples of the more complex messages because it's a lot of code to read, and Phil showed you an example earlier on. But I think this is worthwhile illustrating. So here, particularly at the top here, we've got the ODS code. So this is the a physical location code, and then we have the event codes for the different child health events, which is basically CH for child health and then a numeric identifier. So the actual content of the subscription is relatively simple. It's easy to, the whole point about this is to make it easy for organizations to consume these events, to interact with this service, to connect to and receive the data that's relevant to them. Now, okay, I'll just skip over this. One of the things, as I mentioned, the base FHIR standard that we're using for subscriptions, the model is that when a subscriber, or when an event occurs that is of interest to a particular subscriber, we should notify the subscriber there's an event there. The subscriber should then go and retrieve that event. Some systems aren't at that level of maturity, so they've asked us to actually just send the event straight to them. So we have that as an option. And we can also extend the nature of the processing that we're doing to the FHIR message as it flows through. So as well as applying subscriptions, we have the ability to apply more complex processing to that should it be desired. But certainly in the case of the work that we're doing in Phil's area at present, that's not been necessary. The interaction with the national service, as I said, validating demographics, validating the NHS number, looking up their location, looking up their GP, resolving the child identifier to a geographic service provider so we can get the messages to the right place. We know where the child is. We know what the events are that's happening to them. We can help keep them healthy. Okay, so that's my part of the presentation finished. What I'd like to do now, any questions? So you want to look at this, your question is you want to have a look at the picture of the diagram. The question is which of these components within the solution involved custom coding and which of these are standard components within HealthShare. Yeah? So all of these are standard components within HealthShare. Okay? So there's very little in the way of custom coding or configuration required to construct the solution. A lot of the work that went into deploying the solution was discussing and agreeing with the NHS and the other suppliers how to interact with each other, how to implement OAuth, because there's lots of options on OAuth, how to manage the interactions between the various endpoints. As I said, some suppliers can follow the FHIR standard more closely than others. So the majority of the effort that's gone into standing this up has been associated with the coordination with the other suppliers. Very little coding has gone on in actually constructing components here, because this is based on and uses pretty much standard componentry within sort of HealthShare. So, question.
Is there any reference demo available that shows the construction of one of these productions?
There's not a reference solution available online at the moment. However, if you're interested in how we've implemented this, I can give you more details after the.
It's nice when you can go to the samples box and find something there that says here's FHIR stack this in.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and this is it's something we might do in the future, but certainly it's not there as a reference sample at the moment. All the components are there, though.
Yeah, and what we're doing in terms of the NHS is we're creating specifications that suppliers can pick up and utilise. It's not that it's locked in and the intellectual property is not within an organisation that holds on to it, a bit like I was talking about value care before. So we have, it's on the internet, so we can put links to, there's a video that goes into a bit more detail about it that Tony Bukes from InterSystems has done. There's a couple of documents that go into quite a bit of detail about the specification and some of the, you can't plug and play with the bits that you're asking, but you know there is a lot more detail just to prove that it's not just smoke and mirrors.
Some of us work in concrete, right? It's kind of nice to look at a production and say, oh, I see, there's that production item, it's this class.
Yeah.
It looks like this is how it would make my...
Yeah, and the answer is that the code isn't available on samples at the moment, but certainly we can talk to you about that if that would be helpful. Okay, so the question is, does this solution support any other notification mechanisms apart from FHIR? And when we were originally scoping the work, the potential of using other communication methods, whether it was version 2 or whether it was email or some other form, was actually discussed. But I mean, Phil's laughing somewhat there. But I think it's reasonable to say we were successful in getting all the initial parties to agree that they would only use FHIR. Certainly within this, there's the capability to take the content from a FHIR bundle and transform it into a version 2 message, or to generate a PDF from it that you deliver via email, or use some other communication mechanisms.
Yeah, and I mean I am laughing because you know these are international standards. We want to move these international standards. So we still got something in the NHS called Mesh, which is an asynchronous point-to-point. We can support that, but we'd rather move to, you know, services that we can plug and play, and we don't have to add in extra complexities. But it can, and like I said about the cashless society we're working to. Initially, it was the big supermarkets, and now you can go and spend at PayPal. You can put PayPal into a little device you can buy for $9.99, and you can go to a car boot sale or whatever you call them in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly the interfaces to the national services aren't using FHIR. They're using, well, one's using EBXML. It is using an XML, an HL7 version 3 XML payload wrapped in an EBXML wrapper. That's for one of the systems, and the other that Phil alluded to using Mesh is basically in effect wrapping a FHIR bundle as a document within a web service call. So it's there is other integration mechanisms in scope here. So the question was, how's the workflow for revoking access happen? Well, the thing to remember here is that we're authorizing and authenticating system endpoints. We're not authorizing and authenticating end users. Okay? So at the moment, there is a very limited set of systems which are publishing events or subscribing to events. And those systems are set up manually within the OAuth 2 service. At some point, as this scales out, there might need to be something else. But even then, how many subscribing systems are you going to have? Unless you sort of go nationally, in which case you might have to, and then you might need to do something better. But at the moment, it's you know, there's 4 or 5 systems manually set up in the OAuth 2 server. Question at the back. Do you want to answer that one, Phil, about the Red Book? Okay. So the question was, Is it the parent who's looking at the Red Book record that needs to authenticate, or is it some other system that's in the middle? And the answer is the Red Book's coming via an aggregation portal, which itself has an app. So the authentication endpoint is the Red Book, is the system that's behind the Red Book portal, not the people who are viewing, not the mother that's viewing the data via the Red Book.
Just to add to that though, we are subscribing on the individual, so it's on the NHS number, and we've got the citizen identity and the proxy access. So we've got that legitimate relationship between mum and her children. We could also give that access to father, you could give it to grandparents. You can also revoke that access when child is taken into care or foster care. And we've got many rules on who can and can't see a record. There are varying levels of foster care, up to, if my child's in foster care, I can still see that child, so I've still got access. Or, no, I've been a naughty boy, no, I'm not seeing anything about that because they want to take everything off me. So actually, there's some safety features in having it digital as well. So, those are the kind of things we're looking at. It's not easy.
I think there's
Simply put, yes. That's the nirvana that we're looking for. Is that so? Care is a partnership between the parent and the carer, so that we can input data. Again, we've got to be very careful because I realise as a small child, height and weight is a lot more important. It has to be a lot more accurate than as a teenager or something like that, especially if you've got comorbidities or whatever you've got. So, again, well, that's and again, I put that thing up there with blood pressure, the Internet of Things. Can we start to get watches, scales to feed this data back? I mean, we've got some pilot things. I have to laugh. There was one where the scales were talking to something that was alerting someone about the weight of a elderly lady. And all of a sudden, they all rushed up to this flat. Oh, you've lost weight, you're now 30 kilograms as opposed to 50 or whatever. What's happened? My son weighed his bag on my scales because he was going on holiday, and it had to be under 30 kilograms. So, we've got to make sure that we can authenticate the data as the truth, and that doesn't happen. But yes, that's absolutely what we're trying to do.
So the question is, how are we planning to bring the information back? Okay, so the model that we have at the moment is, as I say, it's a system-to-system disconnected communications model. So there'll be a certain amount of in the current architecture, using the current systems, the data from the parent would be fed back into the Red Book application, because that's the mother's interface to her child's record. And so from that perspective, the Red Book application would be an aggregator. The question then happens, what happens to that data? So then, in this model, the Red Book application would then notify the event, i.e. the height and weight reading, to the EMS service, and the service would then send that back to perhaps the primary care system, or perhaps the child health information system, perhaps both. So the child health record application would notify that data back into the system, which would then flow around the economy. Yeah.
So if you remember this slide that I put up there, that's what we kind of meaning in terms of this, is that you just can't design a Red Book app and plug it into this service. You've got to go through a process where we're designing a specification so that we know that is, because these are tantamount to medical devices almost. And you could argue that it is a medical device, to be honest, if someone's acting on the stuff that's going in that you're inputting about your child. So, it isn't a free-for-all, but we do want a vibrant market where, we don't have a single monopoly, because no one likes a monopoly, well, apart from the supplier.
I'm sorry? Oh, who generates the tokens? Well, in this context, it could have been HealthShare, but in this context, there was another OAuth server in the network already configured, so we decided to use that. So it was a simple implementation choice, something already there versus standing something up.
And it was cheaper for me.
Yeah, indeed. Did you have one more?
Oh, just a quick one. From my perspective, I don't know as much, and I apologize. I don't know as much about NHS as I probably should. But it's my understanding at this point that virtually all medical care in the UK occurs in the context of NHS. So is there an expectation that you'd be receiving information, medical information on a child or anyone else from other than a parent? Are there private medical services that still do work that you need to interoperate with on this?
Again, yes. So I again, stop me later or whatever, but I talk about the railways a lot. So in the UK, after the Victorian times, Industrial Revolution, we had hundreds of railway companies. Then we standardised onto 4, then we went down to 1, and now we franchise. So what we're looking at is, can we have a franchise model? Well, NHS England, this isn't an NHS England, this is my comment now. But can we look at that in terms of a franchise model so that, for argument's sake, you could take your child to any facility, whether that be a supermarket for a flu jab, a GP, or as long as they are kite marked for that. So you've got the technical kite mark and you've got the clinical kite mark. So as long as they are commissioned or allowed to provide that service, absolutely, that's where that for me is, yes, we have a monopoly over healthcare in England as well, but, we want to make sure, again, that we can have that, because that's good for the patient. It gives you that choice. You're not stuck 9 to 5 going 10 miles down the road to the GP or whatever. Culture should trump strategy, and I hope that that's where we get to.
Okay, in that case, we're a little overdue, but fortunately, the last session, so we could do that. Thank you very much.